Bloodroot is one of our earliest spring wildflowers. It'll often bloom while there's still snow on the ground. The flower only stays around for a few days, the petals fall off, and then the leaves will begin to develop. Until finally you get a large enough leaf that maintains itself throughout the summer to build up energy to bloom again next year. Bloodroot receives its name because the root does in fact bleed. If I pull this plant up, you'll notice that there is a red-like substance that comes out of the root. This was used as a dye by settlers and Indians to dye different items. Very unique plant that actually has been researched because of the compounds that are in it and is currently being used in toothpaste to control plaque. Another common plant in our woodlands this time of the year is what we call Dutchman's Breeches. You'll notice the fern-like shaped leaves and then the unique looking flower that can be found hanging along the edge of the stem. The flower takes the shape of what a lot of people call either a tooth or a pair of pants, and that's where the name comes from, the Dutchman's breeches or Dutchman's pants hanging on a clothesline to dry. Now this flower has another nickname, and that is little blue staggers. And the reason it's called little blue staggers is because if cattle eat this when it's found in a pasture, it has a toxic and narcotic effect that causes them to stumble around. So not something that you want to encourage in your pasture. The flower is related to the bleeding heart, which it looks like, and can only be pollinated by bumblebees because bumblebees have a long enough proboscis that can reach into the end of the flower and pollinate it, whereas other bees do not. Trout lilies are easy to identify by the speckles on their leaf that resembles the speckles on a trout. This is a common yellow trout lily. You can see the speckles on the leaves, and you can see the yellow flower, which is actually a lily, and it has 6 petals. Now the trout lily can also come in white, which is a lot rarer, but you'll notice the leaves themselves are speckled, just like the yellow ones, and you can see the white flower with the 6 petals that has the same shape, just simply a different color. Now another nickname for this flower is adder's tongue, and it's called an adder's tongue because an adder is a snake. When you look at the seed head on this flower, you'll notice it looks like the head of a snake with the tongue sticking out, and that's where the seeds are going to be. So we have both yellow trout lilies and white trout lilies in Ohio this time of the year. Spring beauties are just that. They're a pretty flower that blooms early in the springtime. They're easy to identify in that they have 5 petals that have pinkish lines that go down the petals. They also have 2 leaves that are on the stem that look like grass. Spring beauties begin to bloom early in the year and will continue for a month or 2. The older flowers you'll find lower on the stalk and the newer flowers up on the end. If you dig up the spring beauty, the roots will have little round tubers connected to them, and those can actually be eaten as a potato substitute. This is one of the many of thousands of species of violets that are found across the world. Particularly, this is the common blue violet. Violets are easy to identify because the leaves are basically heart-shaped, and the flower has 5 petals. The petals, though, are not regular. They're considered an irregular flower. So you have 2 petals on the top, 2 on the side, and then 1 on the bottom. Violets can come commonly in Ohio. They come in the blue color, but they can also come in the yellow color, and they can come in white. But you'll notice that the yellow one also has the heart-shaped leaves. Violets are edible. You can candy the flower itself. You can make a purple jelly out of the flower, and you can eat the leaves on salads. They're very high in vitamin A and in vitamin C. The large-flowered trillium is Ohio's state wildflower. It's called a trillium because it has 3 petals, 3 sepals, which are the green leaf-like petals found behind the colored petals, and 3 leaves. Large-flowered trilliums bloom white. As they age, they'll fade to pink and eventually die out. Toadshade is a type of trillium that blooms earlier in the season than the large-flowered trillium does. You can tell it's a member of the trillium family because it has 3 petals, 3 sepals, and 3 leaves. Another name for toadshade is Trillium. Sessile meaning without a stalk. As you take a look at how the flower sits on top of the leaves, you can tell there is no stalk sitting there. Indians often use toadshade to help promote birth. Wild ginger grows as a ground cover in rich, moist areas of our woodlands. It's easy to identify by the heart-shaped leaf. The flower itself is difficult to find. You have to look right along the ground. And there is a ginger flower. Because of the coloring, this flower is actually pollinated by flies. Ginger can be used as a substitute for tropical ginger. You simply pull up the root, which grows on a rhizome. The root itself can be candied and dried and then used to make ginger snap cookies. It was used a lot by the settlers as a flavoring for their foods. Jack-in-the-Pulpits are unique wildflowers in that the form they take is known as a spathe and a spadix. The spathe is the covering over top of the flower, and the spadix is that thing in the middle, which is actually what we consider the jack that's in the pulpit. The flower is on the inside. And Jack-in-the-Pulpits can either be male or female. This one is a female because I can see little flowers that are starting to bloom down here at the base of that spadix. Some plants are simply only male, at which point they will only have the stamens. The plant has to build up enough energy in order for it to bloom and to set seeds like a female would. The Indians would use this plant sometimes to eat, but there's a lot of strong calcium oxalate crystals in the roots, and so it would have to be cooked really, really well. Some tribes use it in manhood rituals because if the young warriors could consume the root and not complain and survive, they would be considered men of the tribe. Mayapples don't look like much of a wildflower until you take a little closer look. These umbrella-shaped plants are what we call Mayapples. To find the apple, you have to find a Mayapple that has double-leaved, and underneath the leaf is where the flower is going to be. They're called Mayapples because they do bloom at the end of April and the first part of May, and then later in the season they will set an apple right where that bloom was. Only double-leaved ones will have a flower. There are some single-leaved ones over here that don't. And in a couple years, once they build up enough energy, they will. Mayapples, the leaves, the roots, the stems, the flowers, everything is highly poisonous on it. But the ripened fruit, the actual Mayapple, which will ripen in August, is edible and can be used to make jams and jellies and eaten as a fruit. Goldenseal is an important medicinal plant that's found in our woodlands. It's often collected and sold along with ginseng. Goldenseal is unique in that when you actually take a close look at the flower, there are no petals. Those are simply the stamens, the male reproductive part of the flower. This wildflower is wild blue phlox. It is related to your common garden phlox. It's easy to identify because it has 5 petals on the flower, and the word phlox has 5 letters in it. It smells really good. Other than that, there's really nothing interesting that you can do medicinally wise or edible wise with this plant. It's just a pretty spring wildflower. This unique looking flower, which looks like a shamrock, is what we call wood sorrel. There are a lot of different varieties. Some of them actually grow in your flower beds and in your gardens. This one grows out in the woods, and you can see that it has a 3-petaled leaf, just like a clover would, but it's not a clover. And it has a little flower. In this case, this one's pink. The ones that grow in your flower beds are going to be yellow. Often this plant is called sour grass. Don't know why it's called sour grass, because it isn't a grass. But you can actually eat the little clover-like leaves, and they do taste sour like lemons. You can put them into different types of cakes and breads, and you can also make a lemonade type drink out of them. This wildflower doesn't look like much. It's actually kind of hard to identify as you're in the woods. It has very, very small white flowers on it. But the identifying feature of this plant is when you take and you pull one of the leaves off and you smell the end of it, it's going to smell like black licorice. So this is known as sweet Cicely or anise. And you can actually chew on the end of the leaf and it's going to taste like black licorice just like it smells. There are a lot of different ferns that you can find in the woods. We don't classify ferns as wildflowers because they are not flowering plants. They reproduce by spores on the underside of their leaves. This particular fern is known as a Christmas fern. If you have an imagination, when you take a look at the leaves, each individual leaf of the fern, it kind of looks like a stocking that you would hang up at Christmas time. Ferns are often called fiddleheads when they first come up because you'll notice that the unfurled fern leaf looks like the end of a fiddle. These can be collected earlier in the season and you can eat them. You can pickle them or you can fry them up, and they're a good source of food in the early springtime. Garlic mustard is a highly invasive plant that was brought here from Europe by the settlers to serve as a green that they would plant in their garden and then harvest early in the spring. Unfortunately, it's escaped from the gardens and can now be found across our woodlands and open areas, especially here in Ohio. Garlic mustard produces thousands of seeds, which will grow uncontrolled throughout our forests. The plant can insert chemicals into the ground, which prevents the growth of other wildflowers and even morel mushrooms. Garlic mustard is easy to identify by the triangular shaped leaves and by the four-petaled white flower. Garlic mustard is a member of the cruciferae family, which also includes broccoli and canola. Garlic mustard is a biennial, so the first year it'll come up with just the basal rosetta leaves. The second year is when it sends up the flower stalk and then the seeds. In order to control garlic mustard, you have to pull it. You'll have to pull it out of the ground and take it with you out of the woods. If I would leave this on the woodland ground, it would continue to develop and the seeds would seed themselves, just like I never pulled it. The plant should be taken and should be burned. As you put it in a compost pile, the seeds will continue to develop, and then you'll spread that wherever you spread your compost. So do your part and help us control the spread of garlic mustard.